Today we're going to discuss many subjects. Just the abbreviation. The first subject is the idea of shchita, when we have a process of kosher slaughtering of animal. The question is how, when and how you treated that matter of shchita. Meaning, do you go solely and only by the very end process, or you said that just even the beginning of making this process of shchita, it's already effective. An example to that is someone who's obligated to do it in a temple courtyard. He did it outside of the domain of the temple. How exactly you treat it? The second subject is, since we talk about shchita, part of that is machshava, meaning the person who does that needs to have it for the purpose of shchita. If it's made for the offering and it was machshevet psul, the person did it with the thought for something else. So if it's a paschal lamb or sin offering, you treat it differently. Another subject is witnesses. The subject of people who come and testified against something or for something, and then another pair of witnesses came and said, you can't say that because you are with us in different location. How you treated, or if it was one witness that said something and then it turns that he wasn't truthful, is that sufficient, and how far you can impose on him a fine? So and how you treat it in a sense of retroactive matter. For example, if you have a scribe, a sofer, and then it turns that what he does is not valid. So how far you go with backward? Do you go just from that, for example, pair of tefillin, or you go backward from the time he started? In general, obviously, you go just by the time you found things. But when it's come to these type of things, which call chazkat kashrut, you have a term of chazakah. We explained it many times. As much as even the kashrut in general, you have a mashgiach tmidi, you have someone who's there all the times. There are so many cases, the supervisor, the mashgiach, turns around and somebody does something that it's distrust and ruin out the relationship of a good trust. But then the question is how far you go backward with whatever that person did. It can apply to many avenues. Remember, we had a discussion over people who converted to someone who turned to be unscrupulous, etc., etc. So the whole concept of chazkat kashrut is part of our discussion. So we are today Tractate Bava Kamma, Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, page 72, 4 lines from the top of the page. Hashochet v'nimtzet reifa. The Mishnah said if someone slaughtered, meaning he took an animal, most probably he didn't realize it, while he's in the process of slaughtering it, it turns to be treifa, it turns to be a non-capable to be kosher animal. Or if someone stole an animal and then he slaughtered it as a shochet chulin ba'azara, non-consecrated in a temple courtyard. So he said, even though it's asur ba'ana, asur ba'achila, even though it's prohibited to derive benefit or to eat it, he needs to pay fourfold and fifthfold payment, which means if it's a sheep, it's 4, if it's an ox, it's bakar, it's 5 payment. אמר לרב חביבי מחוזנה לרב אשי, שמע מינה, we derive from that if someone stole an animal that is non-consecrated in a temple courtyard and needs to pay 4-fold and 5-fold payment, אינה לשחיטה אלא לבסוף. So that's what we said earlier and we explained it yesterday. When the conclusion is, when you come to the matter of shchita, the slaughter, you go by the very end process. For those who came today and not 100% sure what it's all about, I would like to read to you something from the commentator here let me find it, is the idea of, here is it, the physical act of slaughter. I'm just reading it from the commentary here at the English Gemarrah. The physical act of slaughter consists of severing the majority of an animal's trachea and esophagus. There is a dispute, however, as to the legal definition of shchita. One view is that only the completion, that's what we said, livsof, of the process legally constitute the act of shchita. The cutting of the trachea and esophagus prior to the completion of the act is viewed strictly as preliminary to the legal act of slaughter. Another view is that trachea and or esophagus the act of slaughter legally begins with the initial incision into that part, the trachea of esophagus, and continued throughout the process until both organs have been severed. So our Gemarrah at this point subscribe to the second view, which means as soon as the agent begins the act of slaughter and makes his initial incision, an act of quote-unquote slaughter is a effect. For example, it was the idea of idol worship. Here is the idol of, here is the non-consecrated that used in the temple courtyard. So basically you go by the end process. So it means the ma'aseh shchita, the act, Rashi said, of the slaughter was by the owner, but the completion, since it's prohibited to derive benefit because it's non-consecrated item that's slaughtered in the temple courtyard, so you go the ישנה לשחיטה מתחילה ועד סוף, כיוון דשחט בפורתא אסרה, since he already started the process, he's already rendered it prohibited for benefit. Why? Because it's חולין שנשחטו באזהרה. אידך לא דמרי כטבח. So he's not slaughtering the owner's animal, and therefore why we impose payment of 4 and 5-fold payment. אמר לרב הונא ברי דרבא, כי כמה מחייב ההוא פרוטה. So therefore that little portion of the slaughter that he is liable, which is he slaughtered before the animal prohibited to derive benefit. It's important note the great ingenious Rabbi Shlomo Kluger. Rabbi Shlomo Kluger was one of the luminary rabbi in the previous century in Europe. So he said, before the Mabul, before the Great Flood, it was prohibited to eat animal, to slaughter and to eat it. The Ramban, Nachmanides, tells us that before the story of the Noah and the Great Flood, so it was enough for people to think about something and they can have the taste, like the story of the manna. Remember the story of manna from heaven? That the Torah said that whatever you imagine in your mind, that's basically what you have. But he explained, after shepagmu, after they did all kind of sins, and as a result God created the great flood which destroyed everything. So then God allowed the sons of Noah to slaughter animal and then to eat them. And the truth is, Reb Shlomo Kluger said that all the animals were saved because of the righteousness of Noah. So therefore God allowed them by force of circumstance to slaughter animal and to eat it. So it means before that it was, the thought was sufficient. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Shashe, the Kedushat Levi, the defender, the Sanegoram Shel Israel, he explained, it's a famous story about him, that he used to drink coffee and hold a can of sugar in his hand. You hear? He never tasted. He was such a tzaddik that by holding the sugar in his hand, he was already having in his mind that the coffee tastes sweet. So that's people who are not pagmu. So there is 2 psukim. One pasuk said, Ki yarchiv Hashem Elokecha et gvulcha. When God expanded your boundaries, ve'amarta ochla basar. So it means that it's enough that you have the desire, ta'ava, to eat basar, that's sufficient. Then is another pasuk, ki yarchik Hashem et gvulcha. So over there, when you are distance yourself, titrachek, then the pasuk says, vezavachta, which means you don't have the feeling of meat. And therefore, you need to have a kosher shchita, and then you can eat it in order to have the taste. That's the famous statement from him. אמר לרב אשי לא תדחה, וטבחו כולו באינן וליקה. He said, the pasuk said, clearly, utvacho in Shmot chapter 21, verse 37. Utvacho, and he slaughtered it, which means the entirely of it, which means he must perform a complete act of slaughtering. And when he slaughters in part, that's not the fulfillment of that. Based on that is a famous Khatam Sofer, long Khatam Sofer. He discussed the subject of miktzat hayom kekulo. If you take part of the day as a full day, for example, minyan, as we know, we need to have 10 for the minyan, right? Now the truth is, in order to repeat the Amida, you need to have the majority, which is, you need to have 6, right? So in one hand, if you have anything less than 10, you don't have a minyan, right? By the same token, if you have a 10, you need to have 6, right? So that's the Khatam Sofer said that what is the idea of rubo kechulo? The Gemara in Sanhedrin said, when you have a bezdin, you have a bet din or rabbinic court, so you need to have for capital punishment 23. So what do you do if you have 18 that said that is a chayav? You need to have the 23, in the full session in order to impose punishment. Tosfot elaborates also. Anyway, it's a response of Khatam Sofer. Elakashya, אמר לי, רב אשי said, הכי אמר רב גמדא משמי דרבא, כגון ששחט מקצת סימנים, he will talk about the case that he slaughtered part of the pipes outside of the temple courtyard, בחוץ, וגמרן בפנים, but he completed the slaughtering inside the temple courtyard. So it means the animal itself is prohibited because that's non-consecrated item that was slaughtered in the outside of the that it's in the courtyard only when it's a completion of the slaughter process. But before that, when it's a maaseh shchita, when they did the act of slaughtering, it's not prohibited. So it's basically owned by its owner. So therefore, you impose a payment of 4-fold and 5-fold payment upon the thief. The Birkat Avraham asks a question, what happens if a person stops in the middle of the shechita? Or if he waits to the very last moment and then he pushes the animal inside that domain. So are you considering Reshut Be'alim or not Reshut Be'alim? Based on that, you have again a very well-known Khatam Sofer about Matzat Mitzvah. As you know, when you go and collect the harvest, you go by the Shat Ktsira. Nowadays, you collect that chita, that wheat, earlier, Lifnei Azman. So they ask the Khatam Sofer why you cannot take a non-Jew to walk in that, to walk in the matzot. So he said, the Gemara said that the person cannot watch over when it's time consuming, so it's time restriction with the process of the up to 18 minutes, a person cannot do it for his fellow. You need to, so it's all matter of seconds. But when it comes to Ktsirat Chitim, you may think it differently. The problem is that there are many who pretend and they cut by themselves, חותכים לבד את החיטה. There are those who do it, so if someone, for example, stole גנב שדה, so you have ייאוש and you have שינוי רשות. So the question is, if he acquire it, he's not acquire it. So that's the problem of matzot gzulot, and that's what the Khatam Sofer. Anyway, איקא דמת להה, אמר רבי שמעון בן לקיש משום דרבי לוי סבא, אינה לשחיטה עליו לבסוף. So again, you go by this idea that the shchita is only at the end of the slaughtering procedure. So at the end of the slaughtering procedure, It's, for example, if you have an offering and you intend to eat it in a different location that you're not supposed to, or a different time, so that's not make it invalid. But the Mishnah in Zvachim, chapter 2, the first Mishnah, also in the sense of halacha, we said that only paschal lamb or sin offering that you slaughter not for their purpose, that make it invalid. The other offering, even you do it not for the purpose of that offering, b'diavad, in a hindsight, it's okay, but it's lo alu leba'alil mishem chova. It's not total befitting for the owner. Rabbi Yossi amar, yeshna lishchita. Rabbi Yossi hold that when it's come to the shchita, mitchila ve'ad sof. So Rabbi Yossi hold that when it's come to the shchita, you can go. Rabbi Yochanan, I'm sorry. Rabbi Yochanan amar that the shchita is from the beginning to the end. So up to the end, which means if you have machshevet psul in any process, it's already affected for the korban. The Gemarrah in Chulin, page 29b, explain it all relates to the shchitat chutz. If the first part of slaughtering is considering shchita, or because he does that outside of the courtyard, that's the way the Pnei Yoshua explains, or not. So that's again the Gemarrah in Chulin, both 36 and 29b. But the Pnei Yoshua have a long explanation over that. So אמר לרב חביבי מחוז נע לרב אשי למה כסבר רבי יוחנן חולין שנשחטו בזרה לאו דאורייתא. If you have the non-consecrated animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard is not by biblical term, that's Gemarrah in Kiddushin, we study page 58. The Gemarrah there bring the disputation if you have non-consecrated item that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard is prohibited to drive any benefit by biblical prohibition or rabbinic. And the Yad David and Mitzpeh Eitan explained that's basically the notion of what Rabbi Yochanan meant, that it's not prohibited by the biblical term but only by the rabbinic term. Page 72b, the isal kada'atach deoraita. If you tell me that non-consecrated item that was slaughtered in a temple courtyard prohibited to drive any benefit by the biblical term, you have an issue of Rabbi Yochanan's point of view. Why did Mishnah impose upon the thief that takes the non-consecrated animal and slaughter it in a temple courtyard? Why the Mishnah imposed on him fourfold and fivefold payment? Because if you go by the Rabbi Yochanan that said that we have the yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof, michi shachit laputa, even he start part of the slaughter, meaning the thief is cut a little, slaughter a little. So the moment he does that, he is rendered forbidden for benefit, asra, idach lav demara katabach. The rest, it's not of the original owner that is slaughtered. So the Gemara responds, אמר לרב אחא ברי דרבא כי כמחייב נמי אהו פורתא. Is basically imposed payment is for the little portion of the slaughter that he is liable. אמר לרב אשי לא תדחה ודבחו כולו בעינון וליקה. The Torah said ודבחו מחרו, so it means in full. And that's not applicable when you have the lacking, when the slaughtering is only by little. So el akashya, so you go back to the question. That's what Rav Chavivi approved. אמר לי, רב אשי respond, אחי אמר רב גמדא משמי דרבא, כי כמחייב כגון ששחט מקצת סימנים בחוץ וגמרן בפנים. Here we talk about when he slaughtered part of the pipes outside of the temple courtyard and completely slaughtering them inside the temple courtyard. So Tosfot have here a discussion, is the Oraita, is the Rabbanan. Basically the whole idea of if someone, the Tosfot said, if someone betrothed a woman, and it's betrothed a woman something that they prohibited by rabbinic law. So the question is, she's basically not betrothed to him, but the Minchat Chinuch ask a question about Yom Kippur. We know that one of the 5 prohibitions Yom Kippur is the idea of wearing leather shoes. So then according to Minchat Chinuch, if someone wearing leather shoes on Yom Kippur, is basically prohibited to have a tiltul, and therefore there's a isur hotza'ah, there's the prohibition against carry from one domain to another. And that's proved, the Minchat Chinuch said that you have the koach b'idei chachamim la'akur davar me'atorah. The sages have the power to override a biblical term. That's a Tosfot in Tractate Sukkah, page 3. That's a morah that rosho verubo basukkah. His main body is inside the sukkah, but the shulchano, the table, is inside the house. So according to that, he's not fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah because he's not fully in the sukkah. So anyway, the way the Tosfot put it is still a disputation if it's a biblical or rabbinic. Now we go to the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us, Ganav al pi shnayim v'tavach u'machar al pihen. If the 2 witnesses come in and say that someone is slaughtered and someone stole a sheep or ox, and then they testify that he slaughtered the animal and sold the animal, the meat, v'nimtzeu zomemin, and then he turned to be liar. They found that they are not truthful. So in Mishnah in Tractate Makot, chapter 5, said that since the Torah said in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 19, Ve'asita lo ka'asher zamam la'asot la'achiv, you should do to that person what he intend to do to his fellow. Measure for measure, right? So you always go by the last testimony, because they said you are with us at that time. So you cannot have it's not an alibi. You basically, and you go by them. How you tell the court that this person stole and slaughtered and sold, you are with us in different location at that time, right? So mishalmim hakol, so you need to pay 4-fold and 5-fold payment. Ganav al pi shnayim, v'tavach u'machar al pi shnayim acherim. So if in fact one stole an ox or sheep, it's established by testimony of 2 witnesses. And then he slaughtered or sold a stolen animal, it was another 2 witnesses that testified for that. And then all of a sudden, elu ve'elu nimtzeu zomemim, both pair of witnesses turned to be liars, right? You look at the media today, right? So you have one newspaper that said one thing that is not true. Then you have another newspaper that based on that make another statement that is not true. And then it's come out that both of them doesn't know what they are saying. And it's all lies, right? So basically you have here 2 pairs that lie over somebody. So הראשונים משלמים תשלומי כפל, the first pair of the false witnesses need to pay double. והאחרונים משלמים תשלומי שלושה. So the last one needs to pay the 3rd fold payment for ox and 2 for a sheep. נמצאו האחרונים זוממים הוא משלם תשלומי כפל. If the last one turned to be untruthful, so the thief needs to pay double, והם משלמים תשלומי שלושה. They need to pay triple. אחד מן האחרונים זוממים בטלה עדות שנייה. If one of the last one, if one of the first witnesses was found to be a not truthful zomemim, so he said the second set of witnesses is invalidated, and therefore the thief needs to pay double, and the last witness is exempt. אחד מן הראשונים זוממים, but if one of the first witnesses was found to be זוממים, בטלה כל העדות, all the sets of witnesses are invalidated. שאם אין גנבה, אין טביחה ואין מכירה. If you tell me there is no theft, so you don't have a slaughter, you don't have a sale. So Rashi explained that the first one, if both of them turn to be zomemim, so it's obvious. But if one of them, then basically everything is obligated and everyone is exempt. But if both of them turn to be zomemim, then the edut gneva is not total batla, and they need to pay kefil. Anyway, the Gemara cites now the disputation between the Amoraim in regards to the zomemim witnesses. Itmar, ed zomem. So that's based on the pasuk in Dvarim, chapter 19, V'ine ed sheker ha'ed. So they use singular. Abaye amar lemafreya hu nifsal. Rav amar mikan hu le'aba hu nifsal. So Abaye said he is disqualified for serving as a witness retroactively, and Rava said now, from that very moment, from now and onward. Abaye amar lemafreya hu nifsal ma'u shara de'asid ava le'rasha. Says the moment that he say the wrong things, he is the evildoer. But Torah amra, and Torah said clearly in the book of Shemot, chapter 23, Al tashet yadcha im rasha, do not place your hand in the evildoer as a witness. Rav amar mikan le'abo nifsal. Rava said no, he is disqualified from now onward. Et zomem chidushu da'atrei utrei ninu. So he said the discrediting of a zomemim witness is a novelty. It constitutes an exception to the normal rule of evidence. Why? The hard treu treininu, for the reality there are 2 against 2. My chazi the tzayet lehani, tzayet lehani. What reason do you see to heed these second witnesses who testified that the first one were somewhere else at the time of the incident? So he heed instead these first witnesses who say that they are present. Hilkach en lechabo ela mishat chidush va'elach. So therefore, since the law that we believe the second witnesses and discredit the first one is a novelty, you can only apply it from the time the novelty takes effect and onward, which means from the time the witnesses are exposed as zomemim. Ika de amrei, there are those who said, Rava namei ke Abaye svirale, Damar lemafreya hu nifsal. Rava also agreed with Abaye, who said that the zomemim witness is really disqualified retroactively from the moment he testified. Vehacha hainu ta'amei de Rava, and here Rava's reason for ruling that he become disqualified only from now onward is the following. Page 73, Mishum pseida dil kochot, the loss of the purchaser, because the purchaser is not aware of his disqualification, uses witnesses on their documents. So that's basically not just here, but all the diyot of Mammon. Because we have the same chashash, Tosfot elaborate in the Rashba. My benayu, what's the difference between the 2 explanations of the Rabbah? The asiru beitrei lechad utrei lechad. So you have the 2 set of witnesses. We have the 2 witnesses testified against one of the original witness, and the 2 other witnesses testified against the other one. Inam de paslinu begazlanuta. So leachlishna de'amart mishum chidush leika, leachlishna amar mishum pser legachot ika. Omar Rav Yirmiyah midifti, avad Rav Papa uvda kvatei de Rav, roa shema l'chita kvatei de Abaye, v'ilchita kvatei de Abaye be'yael kagam. So yael kagam, you should know that it's any place that you have a disputation between Abaye and Rava, so you follow halacha by the Rava, excluding 6 places that the halacha is follow Abaye, and it's going an abbreviation in acronym Yael Yud Ayin Lamed Kagam. So that's basically a list. Yud is Ye'ur Shelo Midat, Ayin is here, it's Ed Domem, that retroactively is disqualified, or from now onward. Lamed is a question, what is Lamed? Some said it's Lechi, some said that it's other things. Kuf is Kiddushin, and then you have Gimel is the Gilui Da'at Beget, and Mem is Mumar. So the whole idea is, this is Gemara in Sanhedrin 27, but the whole idea is, Tosfot said that it's a machloket. We'd like to conclude with the story about the father-in-law of the great Rabbi Piנחas of Koritz. His father-in-law, his name is Rabbi Yaakov Shimshon. He lived in a place called, it's a small city called Shafatik. The story said that he was so brilliant, so ingenious, but he was like, how do you call it, photocopies memory. He can read something and he remember that. So because he remember in such a level, he went to visit Turkey. And the Sultan allowed him to see certain Jewish book that they captured, that they confiscated by the Sultan. So it was a book called Havayot de Abaye Verava. So basically, since it was such an old book, he was able to, read the whole book and remember the entire book. And then after he left, he just by heart sit and start writing and copy the entire book. The problem is, it was one location, only one place that he wasn't sure if the halacha follow Abaye or follow Rava. He wasn't sure. So he felt that it's a sign from heaven that they are not consent for him to reprint that book. It's like the simanim we see in our sugya, Ya'el Kagam. That's what the Tosfot said. It's a machloket. Even with the Lamed, we're not so sure what is it. So that's the idea, that basically in Gemarrah we go by Rava. Anytime you see disputation between Abaye and Rava, you go by the Rava, excluding the 6 places, which is the Ya'el Kagam.